And it was the National Day of Resistance across Israel. Thousands took to the streets against planned judicial overhaul. The scale of the protests unprecedented by all means. A sea of people took over the streets across Israel. This is how Tel Aviv looked on Thursday morning. The protests have been going on for over 2 months. On Thursday, protesters launched what they called a day of resistance to dictatorship. Weeks of massive protests with just one demand: the government should back down on its judicial overhaul plans.
Stop in time, so Israel will be like Poland and like Hungary, and eventually even like Iran if we will not stop this process. And the other side is more a personal message to Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, which says, Bibi, is this how you want people to remember you?
Demonstrators blocked the main junctions across the country. They even tried to slow down traffic near the Ben Gurion International Airport in a bid to disrupt Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's state visit. Benjamin Netanyahu's state visit to Rome here, and WION correspondent Jodie Cohen was tracking the protests very closely. Let's just take a look.
So I'm at a protest in Herzliya at the university. We've seen protests all over the country today with people wanting to make their voices heard against the judicial reform plans. And this is despite talk about a potential compromise solution that has been discussed between the government and the opposition. There aren't direct talks yet, but it is being talked about in the media. But the people that I've spoken to today aren't convinced by that potential compromise solution. It appears the protests are expected to continue, and the legislation in Parliament will also continue. This is Jodie Cohen for WION. World is One.
Now, the action began with marches held by parents and children starting at schools, converging at central meeting points around the country. A number of people were detained in Tel Aviv and Ra'anana for allegedly causing public disturbance. Meanwhile, protesters at Israel's Parliament Square took to unique ways of expressing dissent. Here, a number of protesters stood upside down on their heads to protest against proposed judicial reforms. The mass protests also come in the backdrop of U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's Israel visit. Austin met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The two leaders reaffirmed their goal of preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons.
We have now in Israel the Secretary of Defense coming to Israel. I think that there are on the table a few subject matters that are being discussed between the Americans and the Israelis. One of them, and maybe the most important one, is Iran and the efforts of Iran to become nuclear regional superpower, I would say, and this is a matter of urgent to the Americans and to the Israelis. The other thing is, of course, the tension between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the American government is quite concerned from what seems to be the new position of the new government in Israel. I do believe that this would be also a matter for discussion.
Israeli government is pushing hard to bring its much contested judicial reforms. Critics say the coalition's proposals will weaken Israel's democratic character, remove a key element of its checks and balances, and leave minorities unprotected. Supporters have called it a much-needed reform to rein in an activist court. A much-needed compromise has also been proposed, but that has so far failed to calm the nerves in Israel.
It's quite clear that at the end of the day there is a need for a compromise, but it seems that the two camps are still far from agreeing on one. We do hope, all of us I believe in Israel, we do hope that this or that other kind of compromise will be reached at the end of the day.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.